All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's pre-lock show. We have a crazy 10-game slate on deck, but I kind of like it. I don't usually love these giant slates unless there's like some fun leverage plays in there. And there are a lot of low-owned guys that I like on this slate. So we'll get right into it. Tattoo, good to see you, man. Jay, love seeing you as well. Rodney, sup, fam? Cujo, good to see you. Binkin, God, there's a lot of y'all in here. Appreciate it, y'all. We'll get to it. Uh, Cedric, good to see you as well, man. It's going to be an interesting slate. We'll start off with the Miami Heat going up against the Knicks. Lowest game total on the slate. And we have injury news. Of course, there's Andrew Wiggins, who's questionable. Would love to see that news come in because if he misses, there could be some relatively cheap wings like Jaime, who should see a few more minutes in that kind of situation. But we'll wait and see what happens there. For now, I don't love this spot for the Heat. There's too many games to kind of harp on why. Let's see. Do any Heat players show up by themselves? No, and I'm not going to force it either unless we get some of that news. Things get a little bit more interesting for me on the other side of this game. We have the Knicks going up against Miami. For the Knicks, Jalen Brunson's out. That's really the only thing that matters here, but he's been out for a while, so we're not getting any crazy discounts. Matchup is pretty meh. You never really get excited playing guys against the Heat, but the sim model did like OG Anunoby, so I put a 1% min on him and a like just to kind of add him into the mix. That 7K range is really strong on this slate, so I didn't want to get too excited when with a guy like OG when we know we can't really trust him all that much. Miles McBride is a solid value play on this slate. We have some fantastic value plays of guys like Tyus Jones, but Miles McBride is someone I'm comfortable adding in the mix. Sim model liked him as well. I put a like on him just to kind of see if that would make him show up a little bit more. But again, this isn't a spot I'm really trying to get too cute with. So Tyus, or not Tyus, but OG's at 1%. Miles McBride isn't showing up for me at all, even with that like. And I'm not going to go out of my way to force exposure to it, like I said. So first game is probably the grossest game on the slate. I don't think you have to go out of your way to avoid it. We've seen low game totals have some hidden gems in them before, but not too many stood out for me. Let's see. Love some Knicks. I hear you, Jay. I like Kate a lot too. Love that. But honestly, there's just some things with adding people more consistently. There's like complications with it when it comes to just the type of advice we're looking for. I think Jay's awesome, and he's definitely going to be a recurring guest, but just not too consistently right now. Tattoo, nice of you to join us. Benzilla, technical difficulties? No, just trying to make sure everything's good to go. No, it's not a jean jacket. It's like a fleece jacket. It was a little cold here. Tattoo said, Cedric, I'm forming a party to help Jerry Jones disappear. Not a bad idea. Darius, 5,500 for McBride is a bit steep. Yeah, he's pricey. He's priced. That's why he's not showing up, and I'm not going to force it. Tattoo, I don't know what those emojis were trying to say, and I'm not going to try and predict it. All right, next up, we have the Sixers going up against Houston. The Sixers have a shit ton of guys out, but it kind of doesn't matter too much on this slate, which is weird. But a lot of it's just because these Sixers, they've all been banged up all season long. We got the news that PG is going to be out for a while. So, for the rest of the season. So this team just isn't overly interesting for me right now. From an injury news perspective, let's see who is out. I don't feel like listing all of them because there's too many. But Yabusele's questionable. That's the one I'm really keeping a close eye out on because there could be some random value that we get here. Let's see. No one else really matters to me that much. From a ownership standpoint and exposure perspective, None of these guys are showing up in my lines. The matchup against the Rockets is tough. Like, there's just not a team I like to pick on, and I'm not going to force exposure there. It does look like Ricky Council is getting a decent amount of ownership. I don't hate the play given his price tag, but it's not going to be me today. 10-game slate, you can't play everybody. You kind of have to take your stands here and there. All right, this is where things get a little bit more interesting, and I could easily get convinced and talked into playing more of the Rockets on this slate. From an injury news standpoint, the reason why they're not popping for us is because there's not a lot of injury news. Amin Thompson's out, which carries some weight, but everyone's priced pretty appropriately for that. What I like here is the super soft matchup. The Sixers aren't playing really any studs at all anymore, just a lot of randos. And because of that, I do like taking a shot on some of these Rockets. The one player I would mention on the Sixers who might be going a little overlooked is a guy like Jared Butler. I do like playing guards against the Rockets. That's something I've had some success with. He's probably the only other Sixer I think could be viable. Okay. For the Rockets, like I said, really soft matchup here. So Jalen Green has not been great. I just can't sugarcoat that. He's been very hit or miss. 7,600, we're not getting a discount, but I like the matchup. And so I have a 5% min on him. I'm going to be more than double the field because of how much I like Jalen Green in this spot. Another guy that's a little nerve-wracking to talk about, but I still like is Fred VanVleet. Another guy who hasn't been great, but the minutes are still there, and I like the matchup. I have a 3% min on him because I'm a little bit less confident, but also the ownership is low at 0.28%. So in a soft matchup that's softer than it appears on paper, I'm always just going to be over the field on those type of spots. Next up, we have Terry Eason. You feel a little bit better playing Eason because he's been better this season than some of the other guys here. And he's only 6,200. He's someone that projects well even without doing a like. But that's part of why I want to make sure I'm double the field on a guy like Eason because he has a ton of upside. And in a soft matchup, I like being over on him as well. Let's see. Şengün is viable. I think he's really, really good to look at if Yabusele gets ruled out. So that's kind of like the scenarios I'm looking at there. And then that's pretty much it for the Rockets. When you look at exposures, we have Eason, we have Green, we have Fred VanVleet, and that's about it for me. But I wouldn't talk you out of Şengün. Oh, y'all are trouble. Jesse said, how many unique players for tonight should we run? For me, I only run one, but there's also other processes out there that you can look at in the Discord for other ways of going about it. And also other coaches too, like Madness, Scott, B-Dubs, Uppers, like everyone kind of has their own spin on how they like to use the DS. But for me, what's helped me win tournaments and takedowns and things of that sort, it's always been one unique. Yeah, there's a lot of value on this slate. And per usual, I like to mix in some of those guys so I'm not getting too much exposure to one spot. If the DS pops it, should you lock it? I thought that was going to be like a factual statement, but it was a question. It's very rare I'll lock somebody. Jesse said, Bryant from Indiana, core now with the recent news. We'll look at that when we get there. But I haven't seen that news yet, so let me pull that up and make sure I don't miss it when we get there. Okay, next up, we have the Pistons going up against the Pelicans. This is when we're starting to see a trend towards higher total games. So 233.5, competitive against the Pelicans who, aren't the scariest defense like they were a couple seasons ago. The big thing here is still that, let's see, Pistons, Detroit. Jaden Ivey's out. He's probably going to be out for a while. And because of just the usage he had on this team, it just makes everyone else continue to look even better here. Like I said, the Pelicans are not a defense we have to fear. And it really sets Cade up as the best pay up option on the slate. Sim model likes him a lot. He was showing up in 88% of my lines, maybe even 95% of my lines before I started making some adjustments to the DS. But I do still believe he's one of the better pay up options. He's showing up in 35% of my lines right now. Malik Beasley, we'll talk about. But Cade is really the main guy you want to look at here. Malik Beasley at 5,100 is just a value option that I think is viable. He's shown some signs of upside ever since, I keep blanking on his name, ever since Ivy's been out. And so you never love playing Malik Beasley. We know he's inconsistent. We know he's hard to trust. But when the sim model likes him, I'm willing to take a shot. 7% ownership, though, 7% min, it makes me a little nervous. He did have a 40-plus point. He's had multiple 40-plus point performances here this season. Let me look a little bit closer at the matchup itself, see if I still feel okay about it. Pretty neutral. I'm going to take the 7% min off of Malik Beasley, but I'm going to leave a like just to kind of see if he shows up in a few more lines because of some of the other value we have on this slate, especially at the guard position that I like a bit more. I just don't want to force Beasley in, but I do think he's still a viable value option on the slate. I'm going to rerun after making that change. Okay. Next up, we have the Pelicans going up against Detroit. This side of the ball is a lot worse to look at. Detroit's been a really good defense this season. Zion's a player that stood out for me a little bit in the sim. He was questionable. Now he's a game time decision. I don't believe we've gotten that news yet. Let me double check. If Zion gets ruled out, I'm now seeing that Pacers news you're talking about, Jesse. Yeah, that's wild. That's one of my leverage plays gone too, but we'll get there. Zion would have been viable for me if he wasn't a game time decision, if we got the news a little bit earlier. But just given some of the other plays on the slate, he's just not someone I'm looking to prioritize. But I don't think he's an awful play if he's the guy you decide to take a stand on. So really from this game, I'm really only looking at Cade right now. Just Cade. Any other Pelicans sneaking in? Yeah. Some of the games later on this slate just get so much better that it's hard to prioritize some of these guys who are in just okay spots or bad spots, even at low ownership. Okay, let's see. For the Pelicans, we're going to have to come back to this once the DS updates, but for the Pacers, Indiana, we have Pascal Siakam out. We just got the news that Tyrese Halliburton is out. Miles Turner is out. What about Aaron Nesmith? He's also out. And then Isaiah Jackson's out. And then that's pretty much it. So we'll come back to this once the DS updates. But yeah, Bryant's going to be a core play for pretty much everybody tonight. He's not going to be sneaky. He's dirt cheap. And especially if he starts, which we're all expecting him to start. He typically does here. He's in a fantastic spot. He will be as close to a lock as possible. And this is just one of the awesome value plays we have on this slate. There's a ton. And so one thing I'll do towards the end of the show is just kind of reevaluate how I'm looking at studs with more value, because the more value we get, those lower owned studs become so much more viable because every optimizer out there is going to force Cade. And I love Cade on this slate. But we can play Cade maybe even with another stud now with some of the other value we have that a lot of optimizers just don't think that way. So I like to kind of force the DS to do that by forcing exposure to some of those studs. So we'll talk about it. Looks like Obi Toppin is someone I liked a lot even before we got all of this news. Now he's probably going to be close to a core play for me. I probably can take the like off of him, but I'm going to keep it there just so I remind myself that I and the sim model liked him a good bit earlier going into the slate. Even in a tough matchup, I just liked his price tag. And then Mathurin was projecting well, or at least decently from like an ownership standpoint and like a fantasy points per dollar perspective. Before we got that news, he's another guy I'm expecting to really pop. His minutes are starting to become a little bit more consistent with all the injury news here. He becomes a bit more viable for me. And the increase in usage with Halliburton out can't be overstated. And then I'll look a little bit closer at Nimbard, but off the top of my head, he doesn't stand out for me too much right now. Okay, now the matchup for the Timberwolves gets a little bit more interesting with the Indiana news. The matchup's just really soft at this point, which, makes you a little nervous from how competitive can this game stay perspective, but I still am intrigued. Let's see. We're looking at Minnesota. No, like I said, no real injury news for this team. I like the matchup for Rudy Gobert. I have a 5% min on him now. I'm tempted to increase that. I do want to at least make sure I'm over the field. So I'm going to put an 8% min on him just to force a little bit of exposure there. The center position is pretty strong just with some of the value we have on this slate, especially with guys like Bryant in there now, as close to a lock as you can get. Again, depending on starting lineups, and I like having Obi Toppin in there as well. But adding a guy like Rudy, who's not that expensive, who isn't the most consistent player, but has signs of life, I like it, forcing a little bit of exposure to him there. And then Dante DiVincenzo, I don't love, but the sim model liked him a little bit. I'll look at how much I'm getting with a like. Not any at all. Let's double check. And again, just because we do have better value on the slate, I'm just going to leave the like on him, but I'm not going to force exposure to him at this point. Oh, see? That Cade and Luka combination. We're not there yet, B-dubs, but I like it. I like it. And now half the team takes the night off. Yeah, that's the way it usually goes. No worries, Theo. We're still pretty early. We're only like 4 games in, 6 more to go. And these next few games are games that I like a lot. Starting off with the Chicago Bulls against the Utah Jazz. 2 shitty teams, 2 bad defenses going head-to-head. It doesn't get much better than that. For the Bulls, when it comes to injury news, let's see what we're working with. Chicago. Josh Giddey is doubtful. That's a lot of why you're seeing guys like Kobe White, Trey Jones start to pop off a bit more. Lonzo Ball's already out. Ayo's out. No surprise there. What I really care about, though, is the super soft matchup here. Kobe White is someone I'm going to keep a close eye out on. I took the like off of him earlier because he was just showing up in too many of my lines. Not too many, but he was showing up a lot by himself, and I didn't feel like I needed to boost that. But at this point, I am considering it. I just want to make sure I'm right around 50% or higher. To me, he's a great play, 7,800, great matchup. One of the higher usage rates on this team, just someone I want exposure to. The exact same situation with Nikola Vucevic. 7,300, not overly expensive. We have the value to pay up for guys like this. In a soft matchup, I want to make sure I'm at least right around field weight or a little bit higher. And his ownership's increasing. So I'm going to put that 16% mid on him there. And then Trey Jones is showing up in 75% of my lines. I'm going to take the like off of Trey Jones just to see if that makes him show up a little bit less. Trey Jones is a very viable player. He's been playing a lot of minutes in these spots. We have him projected for 34 minutes. Decent points per minute player. I like him, but there are guards that I like a bit more on this slate that I like to see show up a little bit more. So I just want to see what happens if I take the like off there. And then, let's see. Is there anyone else? Yeah, Kevin Huerter is showing up in quite a few lines. I'll wait until we finish this run. But he's a little pricey now at 5,200, but he's more than paid or shown that he's worth this price tag on this team with all the injuries they have. Even better, like I keep saying, in a soft matchup. It makes it a lot easier for me to click on these guys' names going up against the Jazz. And as you can see, Thomas Bryant is showing up in 99% of my lines. With the like, Kobe White showing up in 94. Obi Toppin showing up in 81. I'm going to keep a close eye on Obi Toppin. He makes me a little nervous seeing him show up that much, but we have to wait and see what ownership's looking like for the rest of the field as well. Matherin's showing up a little bit more. I like that. What team are we on? The Bulls, Kobe White, Nikola Vucevic showing up right with that min. And then the other guys are gone. So if out of like Trey Jones isn't really showing up at all anymore, I have to imagine it's because of the other value we have at the guard spot. And I'm forcing Cade. This guys like Scottie Pippen I like a lot. Tyus Jones. I'm going to put a 30% min on Trey Jones and keep a close eye on his ownership. I just want to be slightly over the field. And then Kevin Huerter, I think I am fine without, just due to his price tag. I do think ownership will fall. But I'm going to put a 20% min on him just because I do want exposure. Because this is a soft matchup. Actually, I'll do 30, assuming field ownership stays close to around that. And then Patrick Williams, I never am a big Patrick Williams guy. And I'm not doing it today either. Good. All right. So yeah, this game also has the highest total game on the slate. So that's why I was more than willing to like put that 30% min on Huerter, Jones, guys like that, because I do think this is a good game environment. Can it get ugly? Do these guys kind of suck? Yeah, but it's worth the risk for me. All right. This Jazz team, man, hard to trust these guys, especially their stars like Kessler and Markkanen. They've been doing weird shit. No other way of saying it. We know they're tanking. Matchup's still great, though, going up against Chicago. So I'm just going to put a 3% min on Kessler. We know he has a ton of upside, even when there's not a lot to play for. 3% min on him won't kill me either way, but I do like the spot. And then Bryce was showing up for me in the sim. I do think we have better value, so I'm not going to force him in at this point. It's getting a little cute at this point on the slate. Don't tell his secrets. No reason to DM this line anymore. Oh. Have you got to Toronto? Any quickly love? We haven't gotten there yet, Rod. No, but we're thinking. We're on the same page. I see you. All right. Next up, we have the Nuggets. This is a hard game to talk about because Jokic is questionable, Jamal Murray is questionable, and Aaron Gordon is questionable. All three are guys I think are super viable on this slate. Because of the value we have, Nikola Jokic is affordable at 13K, and the matchup is great. We'll talk about it. The reason why I don't like Cat today after he had a great game last time out is because the Warriors suck against bigs. They just don't really have anyone who can really defend talented bigs. And if a team decides to take advantage of their talented big, they can have a field day. We saw that with Cat last time out. If the Nuggets want to do that with Jokic today, they can. Only issue is he's questionable, so we have to wait and see what actually happens. But I like having a 10% min on him, just kind of forcing him into the mix a little bit. Michael Porter Jr. stands out, even without everyone. Even with everyone playing, he still stands out for me in the sim. I don't hate the matchup. We know Golden State, they are a pretty solid defense. But even now, like 2% ownership, me having a 5% min on him is decent leverage. And especially if Aaron Gordon gets ruled out, I really like this play. Aaron Gordon's also in a good spot. I have a 12% min on him as well. And so, yeah, I like the Nuggets. It's just hard to get overly excited about these guys because of the injury questions. All right, for the Warriors, I like Steph today, but he's questionable. So we don't really know if he's going to play yet. I'm going to put a 10% min on him as well. Again, I'm just trying to mix these studs in because we have the value. Steph's been awesome, really, ever since the trade deadline. I never love playing him, but he's someone I just want to have in the mix. Let me see, look a little bit closer at the matchup. That might have been what got me a little bit more excited about him too. Yeah, Denver has not been a great defense at all this season, and so I'm more than willing to be over the field to Curry here. Draymond Green, I have a like on. Sim Model liked him a good bit. I do think we have just other viable options, not necessarily better value. I'm going to take the like off of Draymond. If Jokic plays, I don't love the matchup, to be honest. But if Jokic doesn't play, it's a much better spot for Green. And Green doesn't really see an increase in usage with Curry out, but I would like him a little bit more too in that spot if Curry gets ruled out. Jimmy Butler would become the obvious play, but everyone knows that already. All right, next up, we have Memphis going up against the Kings. Another spot where it's just soft matchups on both sides. For Memphis, of course, John Morant is out. I think most of us know that. Santi Aldama is doubtful, which just makes this team a bit more viable for me. The matchup against the Kings is not one to be afraid of, but in particular, it's the Kings have really struggled against bigs this season. I have Desmond Bane listed as like my leverage play currently, but I kind of like JJJ here. Let me look at the sim model. Maybe it'll point me into making a final call on it. It doesn't love Bane too much. It also doesn't love Jaren Jackson either. It likes Bane a little bit more. So I'll keep Bane as a leverage play, and then I'll force matching field exposure to Jaren Jackson Jr. JJJ is just more of a gut feel, but the numbers point towards Bane. This is also a nice high total game, 237, third highest on the slate, close spread. That's why I really like these 3 games right here. They're the ones I'm trying to force exposure to. And then these later games, too, you'll just naturally get exposure to just due to the news. Scottie Pippen Jr.'s 4,700. He's playing solid minutes. Matchup doesn't really concern me too much here. Coming off the bench, typically. Well, with Ja out, he might start. We'll see. But he's viable. I like him. Samato likes him. He's showing up in 9% of my lines, though, so still going to be under the field at this point. A lot of that has to do with some of the other guys I just like on this slate that we'll talk more about, like Tyus Jones, Cade Cunningham, Luka Doncic really taking up a lot of my point guard exposure. So just naturally, I'm not going to have as much Scotty, but I do think he's a strong play on this slate. Not someone I'm trying to go out of my way to avoid. Okay. Let's see. And then Luke Kennard, 4,500. He's been solid. Again, I like the matchup, so 13% min on him. He's not quite as high owned as Scottie Pippen, so I was a little bit more willing to force exposure to Kennard because he wasn't showing up the way I wanted him to. Okay, let's see. Anyone else we're missing? Luke Kennard, 13% min. With the value we have, with just more impactful injury news, I'm going to lower that to like 11. It's only a 2% difference, but 13 still feels a little aggressive with a guy like Luke. And then Scottie Pippen's now at 10% ownership, a little bit higher than he was. Then we have the JJJ and Bane exposure. Where's Bane? We had an 8% min on Bane. Okay, yeah, he's showing up right at 8%. So yeah, I like the Grizzlies, but not going too crazy here. The Kings are a team I'm still thinking about. The problem with the Kings is that no one's hurt, which is great for them as a team, I guess, but not great when it comes to DFS. The matchup against Memphis, though, is kind of great. They give up a ton of fantasy points and just points in general. They're just not a good defensive team. The problem is the Kings just aren't a great offensive team. And even in really soft matchups, sometimes they still struggle. God, DeRozan, man. Sometimes this team just looks awful. It's really hard to get overly excited about anybody here. I'm really looking at like Levine or DeRozan. They're both so low owned. I can just do like a 2% min here and get some nice leverage on if one of them go off. I do think that's relatively likely. Sabonis at 9,400 had a 55-pointer against Phoenix, but outside of that, it's been tough out here for him lately. He tends to do well in more difficult matchups, which I'll never be a big fan of players like that. If he shows up for me, it's fine, but I'm not going to force it. All right. Next up, we have the Wizards against the Portland Trailblazers. This is where things get a little weird and gross, but you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable if you're playing DFS. It's just the way it works. For me, with the Wizards, they're healthy relatively. Let me double check, make sure I'm not missing anyone. I mean, there are guys who've been out, like Bilal, Brogdon, Kispert, but nothing overly impactful at this point. What we like is the soft matchup. Trailblazers are not a defense to be afraid of. Washington isn't either. I liked Jordan Poole a bit more earlier before we had stronger guard options. I still don't think he's bad. It's just hard for me to get excited about the spot. Some model liked him a little bit at 7K. Like 4.8% in the 6.5x column. But it likes guys like Denny Avdia significantly more. So again, like I don't hate Poole. I'm just not going to prioritize him. I think there's better plays on the slate. And I'm never mad when I'm not playing Poole. Like this isn't a bad thing at all. It's probably a little bit of a relief. Alexander Sarr, he's been more consistent here lately. He's starting to show like relatively consistent upside, at least hitting like higher 30s, 40s. Obviously had 50 2 nights ago. I don't hate Sarr, but again, the center position's very viable now with just some of the value we have. And so if he doesn't show up by himself, I'm not going to force it. Yeah, I'm not going to force that. Champagne, I to look a little bit closer at how I feel about him with some of the other value we have now in that 50. I'm going to keep that like on him just to kind of make sure he continues to show up. I like having him in the mix. Whew. 20% projected ownership. I only have 3%, even with the like. Well, now it's 13% projected ownership because of the value we have. It makes me a little nervous. Again, I'm going to have to take a closer look at that. Make sure I feel good. For Portland, going up against Washington, again, a really soft matchup. I like these guys. Even with the value we have, I still like picking on the Wizards here in this spot. Matchup is just fantastic for all of them. Anthony Simons is someone I wanted to make sure I'm over the field on at 7,100. He is at that very viable point guard spot. When we look at Simons, 6.9x to hit. No, 6.9% chance of hitting 6.5x. That's the player I want to have exposure to and I want to be over the field on. Even better, Denny Avdia, 7,100, 8.03% chance of hitting 7.5x. That's someone I want to be over the field on. And in my last run, he fell a lot. I really like Denny. I'm going to put a 30% min on him just to kind of like solidify him in this spot for me. Playing solid minutes, high points per minute rate, exactly what you're looking for. And he's not at a guard spot. He's at power forward and small forward. A spot where we don't have as many strong options. And then Shaedon Sharpe is just a solid play for me. I'm going to take the min off of him. I still like him, but he just doesn't feel like a necessity for me. Hopefully he'll still show up. He was only showing up in 10% of my lines of a min. But again, I'm going to take that off. I'm going to keep the like there. Klingon, he's in a tough spot. He's a value center. It looks like he fell a lot. Fun part about doing a show literally right before log. He's now not showing up for me much at all. I like him enough to put like he's showing up in 5% of my lines. Again, soft matchup against the Wizards. I like him enough to put like a 12% min on him. Scoot has been better. I don't like him. Call it bias. It is what it is. It is bias. I just think there's better options on the slate. Kamara, I liked a bit more before some of the news. I still think he's a really strong play. Like, even if you look at the sim, 5,400 for Kamara, pretty high chance of like hitting 7.5x. Champagne was better, or Champagny was better. Let me go back and make sure I didn't do anything to mess that up. Okay, yeah. I'm going to put the main back on Justin. With the sim model liking him, I feel better about it. And then Kamara, 8%. I'm going to keep that. Okay, cool. Now we're at the Raptors. It took us a bit, but we got there. Ooh, sharp 57 fantasy points last time out. Rick said, or last time in this matchup, Rick said, somebody said earlier today that Portland's been a top 10 defense over the past couple weeks. Yeah, you'll see that, where a lot of these teams get better towards the end of the season as a lot of teams just stop trying. Good reason to, maybe force a little bit less Washington, but I still like Champagny. And we got off most of them, to be fair. Kamara, 8% min, and then I think we're good to go from there. And then we talked about the Raptors. Okay. So I don't believe we have. So we got the RJ Barrett news. He's out. Ingram. A lot of this we've known. Jakob Poeltl's out. Walter's out. Grady Dick's out. Nothing crazy. A little surprised we haven't heard anything about Scotty Barnes. I kind of thought he might miss this game, but it is what it is. What we like about the Raptors, Orlando Robinson, 5K value option. The issue with Robinson is that there's now Thomas Bryant and Obi Toppin. I still like mixing in these guys that we liked earlier because I personally just don't like getting pissed off that I got off a guy that I liked earlier. So even though there's better options now, in my opinion, I do still want to mix in a little bit of him. So I'll put a 10% min there. Jamison Battle was standing out for me in the sim model, so I put a 2% min on him. And then Emmanuel Quickly. I need to see if this was a sim model play or a matchup play. Quickly, yeah, he stood out a little bit in the sim, but not any more than like Sharp or Castle, who I do like more, both of them. I'll put the 8% min back on Sharp. See, sim model keeps me on track. That's why I look at it the way I do. So yeah, I'll keep the 2%. Quickly's at the guard position too. I do like playing guards against the Suns. It's just been something that's worked pretty well for me this season. But again, I just think the point guard position is just so strong today. It's hard for me to value Quickly, who's not seeing 30 plus minutes over at 6,700 over some of these other guys. I don't think Quickly is an awful play. I just can't prioritize him over those players. So I'm going to take the min off. For the Suns, this team's a little bit more interesting with Bradley Beal out. That's why we're seeing Tyus Jones show up a lot. He's only 4,300. I have a 30% min on Tyus. I've seen some people, Father of Three and others, talk about locking Tyus Jones in. I don't hate that. I do think he's one of the better value plays on the slate, but I stuck with a 30% min. Devin Booker is someone that sim model liked a little bit. 9,200, Devin Booker. Didn't love him a ton, but just enough to catch my attention. I was like, okay, I'll consider him with Beal out. I don't hate the matchup against the Raptors either, so not something I'm afraid to do. Let's see, Phoenix. Yeah. So I have a like on Booker, but he's not showing up for me really at all. Tyus Jones, 30% min. Ryan Dunn. This is a play that is gross. He's a low usage player, but it's a sim model play. And when a sim model play makes sense to me, I always play it. Raptors are awful defensively. Dunn's a player who should see 30 plus minutes tonight. He's like I said, low usage, low points per minute guy. He's not fun to watch. When you watch him, you're hoping he does anything. A rebound, an assist, points are few and far for him. But with Beal out again, I do feel a little bit better here with taking a shot on a guy who's only 1% owned. I had a 10% min on him earlier before some of the other value. Now I'm going to calm down and put a 5% min on him. All right. Last but not least, we have the Spurs going up against the Lakers. Last game on the slate. High total game. Spreads wide makes me a little nervous, but it's a spot I want exposure to. Vassell is technically a leverage play. I have a 6% min on him. Castle, I want to be over the field on. Both of these guys have just shown that without Victor and all the other injury news they have, they take up the mantle and they play more minutes than Chris Paul, which is all I'm really looking for. So I want to be over the field on both of these guys, especially in a game I'm just looking forward to watch. And that's just really good from a fantasy point perspective. Keldon Johnson was significantly higher owned earlier. I don't need to have 22% Keldon Johnson, but he's kind of like the third best option here for me, especially with the sim model liking him a little bit as well. So 10% min there for Keldon. And then we get the Lakers. I don't know if we got any Luka Doncic news officially. I know he was questionable earlier, and if Luka Doncic missed, Austin Reeves was going to be close to a lock core play. And look, like earlier, Doncic was only 23% owned. Now he's all the way up to 36. He's showing up in a ton of my lines right now. So I'm going to take the min off and just keep an eye out for making sure he continues to stay in my lines. But I'm not going to force exposure at this point because it's just happening a lot naturally. Reeves, I do still like. He's pricey. He's at the guard position. So even though I liked Reeves earlier, I can't value him over the better options we have at this point on the slate. So I like forcing exposure to him. And then, I'm going to take off forcing exposure to him. And then Goodwin, I have a like on and a 13% min. I'm going to adjust that because of the value we have to 8%. And I'm going to keep the like. Again, I just want exposure to the Lakers tonight. And it's nice having another value option in the mix as well when we have a lot already that I like. But again, I just like to mix it up. Let's see here. B-Dub said I changed my min on Sharp from 10 to 5 just to keep some exposure. What did I do? Yeah, I have 8 right now. Yeah, I agree. I think somewhere between 5 to like 10 is solid. Because I really do like the Portland side of this. Just going to keep those mins on all these guys. But it's getting 10-game slates, man, are not for the faint or the weak of heart. You got to kind of be on top of everything, or you can just like let it ride. But I like to have a little bit more control and see if I'm right. And when I am, it's nice. Beat up, I have to talk to you. I'm curious to see what you're doing with Tyus, but my 30% min feels like enough. Thomas Bryant looks like he's going to be 60% owned, so I'm okay with having him close to a lock. Obi Toppin, I have trust issues with. I'm probably going to cap him at 80 just so I have 20% of my line still alive as long as that ownership stays around 50. Mathurin, I like. I'm okay with him being a core play. I'm curious. I like Luka and Kobe. Is nitpicking, but I like Cade more than Luka, so I would like to see Cade show up as a core play. Then we have the guys I forced men's on. A lot of forced men's today. TJ McConnell isn't showing up a ton for me, but he has pretty high ownership. So he's someone that I'm going to consider forcing like a 30% min on. Actually, let's go ahead and look at it. Point guard position. We'll sort by fantasy points per dollar. Yeah, and TJ is the top option at 4K. So, like, I'm going to lower my Tyus to 20. Trey Jones, I'm going to lower to a 20% min. I'll put a like on TJ McConnell. That should make him show up around core play worthy. That makes me a little nervous. Actually, I'm just going to do a 30% min on him. I don't want him to show up too much because we have so many strong options at the guard position. I keep saying it. I just strongly prefer a mix instead of going too high on any one guy. All right. Cool. I think I'm going to like what I get here. I'm just going to do one more run before solidifying it. But it's going to be an interesting one, y'all. Like I always say, keep a close eye out on the news. And then, of course, all the coaches will be in the Discord. Happy to help you all. If you're interested in having exposure, I mean, if you aren't a DFS Army member, you're probably not here anymore. But click the link in the description. Feel free to use promo code BOB for a 10% discount there to have access to the DS and the Discord and all the good stuff. So also don't forget to like. That's also super helpful too. But I'll see you all next time. Peace out. Good luck tonight.